Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another live Q&A with Islam Answers. Today we have three special guests, Shaykh Nooruddeen, Shaykh Ahmed and Shaykh Shadee. Unfortunately, Shaykh Jamili couldn't make it, the fourth panelist. Inshallah, we'll try to get him next time and we can have the four madhabs. But yeah, for today, before we start, please remember you can leave your questions in the live chat. It should be on the right-hand side or underneath, depends where you're watching it. And also, you can join us in studio. I will post the link shortly. But please remember the questions need to be on topic. And if you have questions that are not on topic, inshallah, we'll try to take them towards the end of the show. And obviously, people that come into the studio will be given priority, inshallah. So for the topic for today is Isha prayer. And we're starting off with the Hanafis, which is being represented by Shaykh Nooruddeen. So Shaykh Nooruddeen, could you tell us when does Isha prayer time start in the Hanafi madhab?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Rabbi Yassir wa in ya Kareem. So according to the Hanafi madhab, we have two opinions with regards to Isha start time. We have the opinion of the disappearance of the red twilight, and we also have the opinion of the disappearance of the white twilight. The white twilight is soundly attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa, and the red is attributed to his students. Some Hanafi scholars did also claim that Imam Abu Hanifa has that opinion too. Just briefly for the audience, what's meant by red twilight and white twilight? So everybody's aware when the sun sets at Maghrib time, it's not immediately dark. It's not like turning a light switch off where immediately it's dark. What happens when the sun sets? When the sun sets, you have a lot of color in the sky. And you also have darkness. That darkness gradually increases. And the more and more increases, the less and less we have of other colors. So what happens as we go further and further into the night, at a certain point, the bright colors disappear, be that bright red, bright orange, bright yellow, the bright colors disappear. When those bright colors disappear, we call that the disappearance of the red twilight. Red twilight has disappeared. Isha time is over. What remains on the horizon are kind of murky, dull colors. You still have yellow and orange and red, but they're murky, they're dull, and remnant light. Okay. So what happens as you keep going further and further into the night, those murky colors disappear, and you only have remnant light. That remnant light is referred to in fiqh books, at least Hanafi fiqh books, as white twilight. It's not literally white, but it's remnant light. And then what happens is at a certain point, that disappears and you have complete darkness. That's the disappearance of the white twilight. So according to Imam Abu Hanifa, you have to wait for that natural phenomena to take place for Isha to have started. And according to the Sahibain, it's the first one, the bright colors. We have both of these opinions. Both are strong, valid opinions within a madhab. Both are followable. We have great scholars of the madhab. For example, Imam al-Tahawi, who said the red twilight is the opinion that we should follow. Imam al-Shurumbulali is also of that opinion. Whereas white twilight, Ibn Humam gave it preference. Ibn Abidin gave it preference too, rahimahullah ta'ala. So we have a valid difference of opinion. So within the Hanafi madhab, you can follow either one of these two. In our madhab, when you have two sound opinions, they are both followable. I think we're waiting for the host.
Barakallah feekum. Sorry, I was on mute. Sheikh, before we move on, maybe we can just elaborate a little bit why we picked this topic. Why is it important, when Isha starts around this time of the year, especially in the UK?
Yeah, I wanted to do this topic and I wanted to get it done fairly quickly because right now, at least in the UK, the sheikhs can speak about what the situation is in the US or in Jersey in particular. We have a situation right now in much of the UK where we have persistent twilight. So the white twilight that I've just described, it remains all night. It does not disappear. Whereas for much of the UK, the red twilight does disappear. So this raises questions. When should we pray Isha? What time, etc. There are also quite a few other issues as well. A lot of masjids, no, not a lot, most masjids, almost all masjids here in the UK, they will pray Isha before it comes in. And even when red twilight and white twilight is disappearing, so Isha is coming in according to both opinions, even then, most masajid, they will pray the Isha before it comes in. So that's a discussion maybe we'll have later, is, you know, that their reasoning for that. But the reason I wanted to speak about this issue is, firstly, what happens when, you know, the natural phenomena doesn't take place for Isha to come in, and what happens when Isha is very late. What are the options?
Barakallah fiqh. Okay, maybe we can move on to the Malikis now. Shaykh Shadee, if you could let us know the opinion in the Maliki school.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Salat al-Isha begins عند مغيب الشفق الأحمر. And the Malikiyya determine أقم الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل to be that الظلمة هي انقطاع بقايا شعاع الشمس. So that ayah is the indicator and one of their proofs that Aisha comes in upon the disappearance of the redness in the sky. There are other evidence for that is from Umar ibn al-Khattab, who wrote to his governors saying this and citing this verse. And the other proof of that is that Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam, when he prayed with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the prayers at the beginning of the time on the first day, and then at the end of the time on the second day, he prayed at the maghrib, the absence of the shafaq al-ahmar. So that's the idea and the concept of when Salat al-Isha begins. It's they do not have to wait for the disappearance of the white light. Simply maghrib al-shafaq al-ahmar.
Barakallah fiqh. And then finally, if Shaykh,
can I just please jump in? I want to ask Shaykh Shadee about the Maliki method. Sayyidi, do you have the concept of al-asfar? Because we have al-ahmar, al-abyad. Do you have al-asfar? So we have the red twilight, the white twilight. In the Maliki madhab, is there any mention of asfar? Yellow, literally, but
not the one, not in the works that I've read, but it's possible. I mean, I'm sure in the mutawalat they have everything mentioned.
Shukran. Okay, Shaykh Ahmed, if you could give the Hanbali opinion.
طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So when pertaining to obviously the beginning of Maghrib is known, similar to, and I think it's the opinion of the majority of scholars based on what we're going through over here, is that in the Hanbali school thought also they relied upon opinion is that the Maghrib ends after the Zawal al-Shafaq al-Ahmar, right? The end of the red twilight, and they based that on several ahadith. One of them from Umar ibn al-Khattab radhiyallahu anhu, when he said وقت المغرب ما لم يغب الشفق, right? That the time of Maghrib is as long as the shafaq, which is twilight, is not gone. And then even clarified in hadith by Abdullah ibn Umar, where he said later on, he said إذا غاب الشفق, إذا غابت الشفق إذا, he said الحمرة there somewhere, right? So he said the shafaq al-humra, فإذا غاب الشفق وجبت العشاء, right? So he said the twilight is the redness. So if the twilight is gone, then the Isha enters. So for the Hanbali school thought the Isha enters right after the the end of the red twilight, right? Even if there is still some that white twilight is still there, that light in the sky, that is the beginning of the Waqt al-Isha. And if there is a difference of opinion, I do not honestly recall any difference of opinion about this. Because at least the many of the textbooks that we refer to don't mention a secondary opinion, which means that even if there is a second opinion, it might not be a strong secondary opinion. Allah.
Barakallah feekum. Okay, Shaykh Nooruddeen, if I can bring it back to you. A lot of people will hear about degrees. Could you just elaborate on degrees, and then maybe the other shaykh can also jump in what they correlate to?
Absolutely, no problem, inshallah. I just want to respond because the sheikhs obviously mentioned hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam regarding, and they quoted Sahaba as well. From the Hanafi perspective, or let's be more specific, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, his perspective, or what the Hanafi scholars say about why he went with white twilight. who say if you look at almost all of the prophetic hadith, they will not specify which shafaq it was. The Maghrib al-Shafaq is mentioned, that the twilight disappearing, but almost all of the prophetic narrations do not specify, is it white twilight, is it red twilight? So from Imam Abu Hanifa's perspective, that's a matter that was left open. And then with Sahaba, you had many who said it's red twilight, and then you had some who went with white twilight. So that's why the difference of opinion does exist. I think it's important to clarify for the audience. It presents as if Abu Hanifa has no dalil, or that dalil is clearly against him. Of course, you know, a person can be of the mind that Shafaq al-Ahmar has stronger evidence. That's absolutely fine. But I just want to clarify, it's not without evidence. Now, as for the degrees, so what we're measuring here, what we're speaking about here, when the sun sets, okay, it's just below the horizon. And as we go further and further into the night, what happens? The sun goes, from our perspective on Earth, of course, we're not speaking about what's going out on in space, but from our perspective on Earth, what's happening then is the sun goes further and further and further below the horizon. Okay, it goes a little bit below the horizon. That's 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree, 4 degree, 5 degree, and like that. Okay, at a certain point, and the further below the horizon it goes, the darker it gets above the horizon. At a certain point, it's so far below the horizon that all red twilight disappears. Okay, there is some room for difference here and interpretation, but I agree with many observers who have said that the red twilight disappears at somewhere between 12 and 13 degrees. I'm open to, you know, maybe some difference here, but this is what I'm in agreement with. Personally, when I pray Isha at red twilight, I wait until 13 degrees. Now, we also have, you know, Dr. Asim Yusuf here. He done a lot of observations. I disagree with a lot of his conclusions, but his observations, you know, they're reasonable. I don't agree with everything he's done, but again, he went with 12 and a half. Sheikh Muhammad Jamili, who often joins us, he's also, I think he goes with the 13, and many others I know who have observed. But in any case, at 13 degrees, I believe the red twilight has definitely disappeared. You go further and further and further and further, eventually you get to 18 degrees or just beyond 18 degrees. Now white twilight has disappeared, meaning it's completely dark. Now, I know there are some people who argue that red twilight disappears at 15 degrees, and that's fine. I'm willing to entertain that. All I will say is any person I know who has observed, and I've observed personally numerous times, has always found it to be somewhere between 12 and 13 degrees.
So out of curiosity, Shaykh Nooruddeen, so how do you, like, you know, how do you measure that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see below the horizon. So, but what generally happens, and I don't know what Dr. Asim done, but I know what Sheikh Bilal and me, and I believe Sheikh Jamili and others do. There's an app we use called SunCalc. So this app tells you at this time how far below the horizon the sun is. And then at this time, you know, you watch it, you observe it, and it tells you how far below the horizon is. So what happens is I'm observing the sun, I'm observing the horizon, okay? And I'm also looking at the app. And when the red twilight disappears, I now look at the app and it says the sun is now 13 degrees below the horizon. So I see that there's no red twilight, and this is telling me this is that point at 13 degrees. Now, I like that. So that's what I use. You know, I don't know what expert astronomers do.
It's just out of curiosity, Sheikh. Just out of curiosity.
Have any of you done any observations by any chance, Sheikh Shadee? I assume Sheikh Ahmed you haven't.
Well, no, it's not that. I do it visually, right? It's essentially because, you know, the entire, like, you know, our Sharia is not necessarily based on calculations or anything like that. It really is visually. Now, I do know that a lot of the apps that are being used for Isha, I think they go a little bit beyond after, like, you know, the Zawad of Shafaq al-Ahmar. At least from my observation, right? Like sometimes, like, you know, Shafaq al-Ahmar is gone, and it's still like a few minutes before the Isha kind of, like, you know, it comes in. Because I think most of the calculations are around, like, you know, 15 degrees, 14 and a half, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Sheikh Nooruddeen?
Let's say the 15 degrees. not in Jersey, but 15 degrees here in the UK, that will make Isha very, very late.
I'm just asking, I don't know, because I'm actually, my next question for you is like each degree, like how many minutes does it vary, right?
Yeah, again, it depends on the time of year. Like in the winter, you might get a degree after a minute or two, and in the summer, because you know the everything is slowed down in a sense. It's going to take much longer. So it's not a matter. It's not consistent. It's not always the same.
I understand. So in a time like in summer, like what's the average? Like how long? Like each degree is about how many minutes difference?
If I can maybe share, 1 second. If I can share my screen, you'll get an idea. Let's see if I can put this up. So here's Luton prayer times for today. So if you can see, Isha 13 degrees is coming in at 11:35, whereas 15 degrees is coming at 20 past 12. So it's quite a difference.
Yeah, it's almost an hour difference.
That's what's that? 45 minutes, 46 minutes. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, about.
Yeah. And that's just for 3 degrees. Now, again, Sadie, this will not be the case in the winter. Winter is going to be much swifter. And every day, this will vary a little bit. So, yeah, 15 degrees. Go ahead, Sadie.
January, you'll see like 15 degrees in January. 13's at 5:32, and then 15's at 5:46, and then 18's at 6 o'clock. So there's not much difference.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Dr. Shadee. I apologize.
No problem. I was just saying that I don't have any commentary regarding the degrees, but regarding the shafaq, the interesting part of the istidlal of the Malikis for that shafaq means al-ahmar is that linguistically they're synonymous. So they make istishhad and istidlal with a saying of a Bedouin that he pointed to a red thobe and he said hada shafaq, like, right? So the word shafaq actually means red, and that's why they went with the disappearance of the red light rather than the white, and they just ghasaq al-layl and al-shafaq, maghrib al-shafaq equals redness, because literally in the language that's what it means according to them. So just wanted to share that interesting little tidbit there.
If I can say something, so let's start with Shaykh Ahmed, and I'm going to go to Shaykh Shadee, because again, I've heard things from the Maliki perspective. So Shaykh Ahmed, you, if I've understood you correctly, so to determine Isha, you obviously look up to the sky and you look and see if, I'm guessing, and you can correct me, that has the red twilight disappeared? And if it has, you'll pray Isha. Is that how you do it?
No, honestly. No, honestly, most of the time that happens just to make sure that we don't miss Maghrib, for example, if we're on the road or if we're outside, whatever the case is, and we're kind of tight on time or whatever the case is. Like, I'm just kind of always keen to make sure that we don't miss Maghrib. But this is when I really look at it, right? To make sure I didn't miss it. I never really use it to determine Isha, because, like, Isha for us, at least in New Jersey, is a bit more, like, it's not as late as it is in the UK. And, like, we would just wait for the masajid and so forth, right? And quite often, usually, like, the iqama is always done at least a few minutes after the adhan. And so, like, it's not a situation where we have to, at least for us, to kind of be very meticulous and kind of look into it a bit too much. At least that's my, like, this is why I look for the shafaq al-ahmar. It's not for my interest to pray Isha. It's for my interest to make sure that, like, that we do not miss Maghrib.
Yeah. Makes sense. So with practically for Isha, what you do is you follow the timetable that's laid out for you.
Yeah, pretty much, because there's no need, like, because it's well into Isha, right? Yeah,
that's fine. So Shadee, how is it with the Malikis? Because the reason I raised this, I was once in on a Deen intensive course where a Maliki teacher was teaching there too, and what he was doing was, rather than looking at any timetable or anything like that, he would look at the sky himself, and just from where he is, no kind of effort to go out to the horizon, flat land, etc., just literally where he is, and he'd be willing to pray Isha, say 40 minutes after Maghrib. He'd say, look, I can't see the shafaq ahmar now, so I'm just going to go ahead and pray the Isha prayer right now. And very often he was praying maybe half an hour, 40 minutes, maybe more than that before we were. So how does this sit in the Maliki madhab?
Did you say that a Maliki used to do that?
Yeah, Maliki scholar. Senior, certainly in age. I don't want.
Is he Libyan?
No.
Okay. He's Mauritanian. Okay, so well, for us, the calculation of degrees is an estimation. It's not a reality, right? Like even calculation of Ramadan, that's an estimation, but it's not a reality. A calculation of what should be happening is not a reality. So you have to confirm that the reality exists. So in principle, looking at the sky for somebody who understands the skies, sees the skies, has access, in other words, it's not blocked by buildings, and understands the fiqh of the prayer times, takes priority over any calendar, over any calculation, because epistemically they're different. A calculation is just based on the past, a million data points of the past. This is what should happen. We think. So epistemically, that is not a reality. That didn't happen, right? So therefore, we can't base ibadat upon it. We can base a lot of other things on it. You could base your business on it, etc. But you cannot base ibadah upon a likelihood, because it's not a reality. So that's epistemically, he's correct in that the idea that what I see takes precedent over the calculations. So what's curious to me, or what makes me wonder, is that 40 minutes is very short. But then again, you know that these numbers can't always be, they can't always be, we can't, it's la yandabit. In other words, it's not a rule, because the center of the earth is different from the north of the earth. The winter is different than the summer. So numbers, you can't really go by minutes. Now, the other question for me is that if he's in the city of London or any city,
it's a little bit further out, you know, it wasn't right black in the city, but it was still a relatively urban area. What really surprised me is even when it was a cloudy day, the Shaykh done it.
So here's the thing, it's the cloudiness and it's the buildings. So like when I studied this chapter, one of the things they say is you have to be able to see. If you don't see, then you rely upon the calculation, but you add a few minutes out of ihtiyat, out of caution. Because as we said, the calculation is not a reality. It's the estimation of what the reality should be. Therefore, but if we know that the calculations are ballpark around, then give or take 5 minutes, you know, give it a padding of 5 minutes, then you should be safe.
I mean, I'd say this more or less the same thing from the Hanafi perspective. Look, if you're out and there's no impediment, there's no artificial light, and you can see the horizon clearly, and you can clearly see the red twilight has disappeared. Obviously, you need to know what that means, and you can clearly see that. Then fine, you can go ahead and pray Isha, no problem with it. My concern was not, he must stick to the calculations. My concern was it seemed really loose. You're just wherever you are, there are buildings all around. You can see a portion of the sky. Certainly can't see the horizon where I saw him looking anyway. And it was like, no, this is how we do it in the Maliki madhab. We obviously, you know, prayed Isha later according to 13 degrees, but it was interesting to see.
No, we would require the ability to actually see. I mean, even if you look at the Ramadan, which is the most important time that we need to know, is when the month starts, because the ibadah begins immediately there, as opposed to salah where you have time. So in Ramadan, if you can't see the moon because of cloudiness, then you can't make a decision. You have to give it another day. So the conditions being that you have to be able to see what you're looking at, and that's otherwise, might as well, if you go by cloudiness, you could break your fast very early before Maghrib actually is in, right?
If we close your eyes and say it's Isha time.
Because England and those parts get so cloudy that right after Salat al-Asr, by 10 minutes, it could be so dark, right? And you go to places like Florida, where the tropical weather, where clouds can come in such great abundance that it will literally be dark. You need to turn lights on. And it's like 5 p.m. and Maghrib is at 7 p.m. So
Okay.
So one of the reasons we brought this topic up was obviously in the UK, Isha gets very late. So obviously in the Hanafi school, Sheikh, maybe you can speak about it. You know, we don't have this, this rule where we can just combine prayers, or we can bring it earlier than the prayer start time even.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something in the other schools that we can look to, but yeah, maybe Sheikh, you can speak about the Hanafi school first.
Yeah, so this is precisely why I wanted the Malikis and the Hanbalis to be represented here. Shaykh Muhammad Jamili is not here. Allah Most High bless him. He has produced quite a few videos for us already on this issue. People can watch them. They're on the Islam Answers YouTube channel. But the discussion with Shaykh Muhammad essentially was, look, Isha can get very, very late. Here in the UK, at times, Isha can go beyond midnight, can go beyond 12. And then Fajr is, ends at say 4:30-ish. So it's a very, very tight period, not allowing people to have much sleep. So the discussion with Shaykh Muhammad was, because the Shafis do in principle allow the joining of prayers, would this be a situation in which a Shafi scholar could give a blanket fatwa, you can join prayers? But people can see that, and inshallah I'm going to pass on to the Malikis and the Hanbalis in a moment to see if they have anything. But from the Hanafi perspective, what we can't do, which a lot of the masjids are doing, unfortunately, what we can't do is say, look, we know Isha comes in at 11:50 p.m., but we are going to pray Isha at 10:45 p.m. or 11 p.m. This is widespread. Alhamdulillah, increasingly, there are more and more masjids moving away from this, but this is widespread. A lot of this is taking place. So, sorry, to go back to the original question, I apologize, Shadee, is in the Hanafi madhab, we don't have the joining of prayers. With one exception, the Hajji has permission to join Dhuhr and Asr on Arafah day, at Arafah, with conditions, and is obliged to join Maghrib and Isha in Muzdalifah. That's the only time we have Jama' in the Hanafi madhab. Other than that, we do not have Jama'. Obviously, we have the concept of taking a rukhsa, that a Hanafi can follow another madhab and do Jama' according to their conditions at times, which we'll come to later, inshallah ta'ala. But in the Hanafi madhab, the solution of, since Isha is so late, just join Maghrib and Isha together will not exist within our madhab, because we just don't have that concept. So if I'll hand back to Sayyidi Waqas, but I'm very interested to see if the Hanbalis or the Malikis have this idea that it's not raining, you're not traveling, you're not sick necessarily. It's just very difficult. You'll have to pray Isha very late, and then you'll have to get up and pray Fajr just a few hours later, and then potentially go to work after that. Sayyidi Waqas?
Who do you want to go first?
Whoever's got an answer for us. Hopefully who's got a solution for us.
Okay. Well, I just tell you what I've taken from the shuyukh, just for the record. This is not my fatwa, of course. This is the fatwa or the analysis of a Shaykh al-Maghili and a Shaykh Mahmoud Shabib. Shaykh Ahmed al-Maghili from Algeria, Shaykh Mahmoud Shabib. So you can just consider me a transmitter, and they're out there. They can be reached for their comments. They both agree, and they both say the same thing, which is what all Malikiyah say, that there is a principle in the madhab that salah cannot be prayed before its time, with the only exception of al-jama' in safar and in matar. There's the only time that jama' can be prayed in, and there is discussion on marad, sickness. Okay. So in this specific case that we're talking about, where the time comes in late or never comes in, that's the question we're talking about. So there's actually three questions. The time never comes in of Isha. Sorry, the time of Maghrib never comes in. The time of Isha never comes in. And the time of Isha comes in late. Let's talk about the third one, because that's most relevant. The time of Isha comes in very late that it's so hard to stay awake, and then wake up in the morning for Fajr, and then wake up for work. That's the issue, right?
Actually, no, I'm saying.
Okay, so the principle that they uphold is that there can never be, in this situation, no travel, no sickness, no rain, nothing. Salat al-Isha during al-Shafaq al-Ahmar. That salah is batil. That's number one. What they do agree upon is that you can delay it and pray it right before Fajr. So you're getting up for Fajr anyhow, and therefore that salah will be it will be valid. It will be valid for someone to delay it past third of the night, wake up 15 minutes before the adhan of Fajr, and they will pray Isha there, having delayed it into the what's called the daruri time, in which it shouldn't be delayed, but due to the hardship, they may do that. The salah will be valid, and then they will pray it with Fajr. Then they will wait. Then a Fajr will go off, and then they will pray Salat al-Fajr. So that's called Jama'. It's not even Jama' Suri. It's Jama' Suri. The image of Jama' is usually reserved for sick people to pray Dhuhr at the end of Dhuhr and Asr at the beginning of Asr, Maghrib at the end of Maghrib, Isha at the beginning of Isha. So now you're doing something totally different, which is a fatwa, Isha at the end of Isha and Fajr at the beginning of Fajr, to decrease the hardship and allow the worker to sleep. Pray Maghrib and sleep at a normal time. Then he's gonna, but the thing is with this, he can't now pray Fajr at the end of Fajr now because he has to get up for Isha. Okay. And that's the solution that they gave regarding the category of Isha comes in very late.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. So, I mean, if I just comment from the Hanafi perspective, we'd have that as well. It's just, it doesn't work for many people. Again, Sadi Waqas, I don't know if you want to put the timetable up again. At times, Fajr will be as early, Fajr start time will be as early as, say, 1:30, possibly earlier still. So it's, mashallah, it's a solution, but what that would mean that a person may be able to pray Maghrib, go to sleep immediately, sleep for 3 hours, get up and pray Isha, then Fajr. So it's you know, it helps a little, but not massively. Because
what time is Fajr?
Let's bring it up, Sadie. At times, it's not always the case, but at times.
Let's go to June 21st because that's your worst day.
I mean, I think for us, it's not been coming in.
Yeah, it won't come in at June 21st. During the longest day of the year, it's just not coming in.
Let me show you.
Sadie.
Yeah, let me show you my screen. So the last time Fajr came in was in May of 20th, and it came in at 1:18 a.m.
Yeah. So, and if we just go back a little bit, then you got 1:30 prior to that, 1:40.
So I think it's 2 a.m., 3 a.m. was at the start of the month, and then it went down to 1:20-ish.
Yeah. So I remember this is what.
When does it come out? When does Fajr come out?
When
I think it starts again in, I want to say August.
No, let's say when it comes in at 1:20. When is it out?
Oh, the end time.
Okay. Sorry, end time. Yeah, sorry. Let me go back. So sunrise is at 5 a.m.
Oh,
okay, so you know what Shaykh al-Maghili also said is that he will pray it after the time. Athiman, but at least it's valid. If he had to choose between the two, he would pray it after the time as qada before Fajr, knowing that he's athim for that, but at least it would be a valid salah. Whereas praying during the Shafaq al-Ahmar, it's an invalid salah. It's like there's no point in doing something invalid.
So
and there's another principle that was given by Shaykh Mahmoud Shabib, where we have no nas in the Maliki madhab. You go with the Shafi'is, but we don't have a Shafi'i here.
Shaykh, just so I can get clarification for the people, are you saying that someone just goes to sleep after Maghrib and then wakes up, let's say, I don't know, 4:30, and then prays a qada and then prays Fajr?
Athiman, yes, knowing that he has done something not correct, but at least it's valid. So the Shaykh puts it the priority. Let's say you can't reach the correct, what is valid and rewardable. Then you go what is valid and sinful, better than invalid and sinful, right? So it's not an ideal thing to choose, but just for your information, at least your salah is valid. He's not giving fatwa by that. He's just saying if we had to make a decision, then that would be less harmful than a purely invalid and sinful prayer.
If I can jump in here, I remember when I spoke to one of my teachers from Damascus, Sheikh Mazin Bakir, he said exactly the same thing. He didn't encourage it. He didn't say, do this. I explained to them what's going on, that Isha is being prayed before the time comes in. And he said exactly what Sheikh Shadee is conveying here. He said, look, it'll be better they just pray afterwards then, because at least it'll be qada, but at least it'll be a valid prayer. He wasn't advocating it. He wasn't saying that's what they do. He was saying this is so bad. It's so much worse than even praying qada, because at least you have a valid prayer. As Shaykh said, athim, you are sinful, it's wrong. I'm not advocating for it. But the point is, it does make more sense than praying it before it comes in. And a big issue I've had with this all along is almost every masjid that's doing this, in my experience, they don't tell the people. The people don't know what's going on. The people think they're praying Isha on time. The people don't have any option of making it up later. They don't have any idea what's going on. So they are just en masse praying Isha before it comes in. But khair, I should also say, Sheikh Samir al-Nas, one of my teachers, he also said similar to what Sheikh Shadee conveyed initially, is pray Maghrib, go to sleep, get up, pray Isha, pray Fajr, get some more rest afterwards. Now, that can work for a lot of people, because a lot of people are such that they can have 3 hours sleep, get up, pray some prayer, have another 2 hours sleep, 3 hours sleep. It works for them. Some people just, in my experience, they found that incredibly difficult. Some people struggle to get to sleep, struggle to get up, etc. It didn't work for them. But yes, that will work for many, many people, inshallah.
By the way, this is very similar to the solution to the modern problem of people having transport leaving Hajj very soon after Hajj and having to go with that transport, and the woman being upon Haid during Hajj and therefore having to make tawaf al-ifada, which is a rukn of Hajj. So we use the Hanafi outlet on that, which is to make tawaf upon Haid, knowing it is sinful, but it is still valid, and therefore having to owe a fidya for that, a slaughter. She has to do a slaughter for that. But is it a slaughter or is it a fidya?
Goat from a camel, Sadie. So more than a cow, a sheep or a goat has to be a camel or a cow.
Okay, so that's the answer to that. So the reason is that that's not the fatwa of what to do. It's just telling you how you can make your Hajj valid, because just leaving and not doing tawaf al-ifada gives you no valid Hajj, and you broke your ihram. So there's a lot of problems with that. So therefore, there is a hierarchy again of not advisable. No one's giving that as advice, but we're just telling you that at least it would be valid. This
is the result of it, yeah. In the Hanafi method, the person would remain in ihram until they done that, or an element of ihram. But yeah, mashallah, good to see you come across to the Hanafis at times, Sadie, because you said earlier.
when we need that's what the madhahib exists for rahmah, and for the madhahib exists for rahmah, but also to that all of the sunan of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam still exist. They're there, and I'm not saying that that's a sunnah, but in general, and not to deviate from the point, but people say, well, the Prophet only had one sunnah. Well, if you look at Hajj specifically, the Prophet did certain things and advised other people to do other things, and that showed the difference between what is a rukn or a fard and sunnah versus a rukn and a fard. So he may have given some people the bare minimum because he knew that's what they can bear, or that's what they had time to do, and he did something else. So his aqwal and his af'al, when they differ, that's what helps us separate between fara'id and sunan. And that's just one example.
Yeah.
If we could go back to Shaykh Ahmed now, maybe you have something for us.
Bismillah, bismillah.
So basically, just to reiterate, as you saw, Isha comes in, let's say, even 13 degrees at 11:30, and Fajr is at, let's say, 1:20. So the time's very short. Is there a way we can combine, or is there any kind of ruling that would alleviate this?
So what I understand from like the relied upon opinion in the Hanbali school is that whenever there is a differentiation, you can clearly demarcate the different time periods of salah, then you are bound by them, right? That you cannot, like, pray a prayer out of its time. Even though in the Hanbali school of thought, I think it is the most, like, lenient with the, like, opportunities or chances it gives people to combine for prayers, right? So specifically in the Hanbali school of thought, it's not just traveling and like, and sickness, but it's multiple other things, right? Whether, like, of course, like, sickness that can bring us difficulty to somebody, but even, like, they mention things such as, like, istihada, or even, like, a nursing woman that is affected or that's harmed by a lot of the najasas, that she keeps having to purifying herself, she can combine, or a person who's unable to find, like, tahara of tayammum or water all the time, or, like, a person who's unable to differentiate the time because of blindness or whatever. Okay, so they have several reasons, right? Or even, like, the excuses of leaving the Jum'ah and Jama'at. So those are all reasons that allow them to combine. And so what I'm trying to say over here is that we can't really give, like, a blanket, like, fatwa regarding this. It could be perhaps, like, maybe tailored to different individuals. So for example, an individual who it really is going to harm him, like, actually harm him in his livelihood, right? Bring harm to their livelihood. If they don't combine prayers, then they're allowed to combine prayers, for example. But that being said, like, I'm just kind of interested, just to kind of be a bit more realistic about the situation that is happening in the UK, right? And I'm guessing part of it is because people want to pray Jama'ah in the masjid, right? So they're kind of worried about going to the masjid and coming back. Is that what it is, or are they also?
No, because even if you pray at home, you're still going to pray very, very late, because going to the masjid, coming back, okay, that might take another 10 minutes or so, 20 minutes, depending on where you live. But even if you wait at home and pray at home alone, you're still praying at something close to midnight very often.
So okay, so that's the case. So and then so if they pray Isha, right, and then they sleep right away, let's say they sleep around 12:30, when does Fajr end?
It depends. Right now, what is it, about 4:50-ish? I think the earliest it gets, I'm speaking from the perspective of Luton, it will differ in different places. I think the earliest, the end time is about 4:30.
Okay, and so there's a huge gap over there, like, at least like you give them like a 4-hour sleep, right? To get up. And I think usually in the summer, people mostly get, like, 4 hours, 5 hours maximum before they have to get to Fajr. At least that's what I'm kind of accustomed to, right? Some people even 3 hours and they're still capable of doing it. And so in this case, like, if you're looking at the Hanbali school of thought, I don't know if there's an excuse to combine at all, right, in this situation.
If I could jump in there, Sheikh, I think it's more so for, I guess, maybe people who have, let's say, younger children. Let's say they're going to high school or colleges, or I guess it's different for you guys that were there, but, like, 14, 15, 16, they're balig, they have to pray, but obviously they've got school in the morning. And so, they can't go to bed at, 12 and then wake up again at 4 and then wake up again at 7. So, there are those kind of cases.
Whose kids are you talking about, Sheikh?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just saying there might be kids out there, the parents who are making them go to bed at 10. I don't know.
Let's forget about kids, but there's some people whose work and jobs are the same, right? Like, not necessarily kids, but some people with jobs. So in the end, like, we're talking about individuals, like, is it actually going to harm in their livelihood? So I'm talking about individuals that actually brings probable harm in their livelihood, for example, right? They make an exception for that. But realistically speaking, like, that's not what happens most of the time, right? Most of the time, like, they still can get up, come back down, like, sleep again a little bit, or delay it as like, further. But if you're asking about the permissibility to combine in this case, if you can sleep for 3 to 4 hours, like, Allah Alam, you can still get up, right? In this case. But like, from my understanding of the madhab, as long as there is something differentiating, right, between those times, then, like, the only reason you'd combine, or the only, like, is if there is an excuse of combining. And looking at the, like, exhaustive list of what they have, they actually specify, like, they say they use جمع لعذر غير هذه الأعذار, right?
So did you have the list in front of you?
Sorry, I can point it out.
Maybe when somebody else is talking, if you could pull it out, it'd be nice just to have it read out on screen in a moment.
So the things that allow combining?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. So those include traveling, obviously, right? Traveling. A person who's sick that is going to harm him, not combining. a female that has istihada, which is irregular bleeding, obviously, because this kind of like, you know, she's continuously bleeding and it kind of like, you know, harms her, whatever the case is, and state of purification, so she can combine, like, you know, have one ghusl because it's grounded ghusl, or make wudu and just combine both of them. The fourth is a nursing woman that is harmed by, like, it's very difficult for her because of the extensive amount of najasa, right? And now if there's no difficulty or harm, there's a debate in the school of thought whether she still takes the rukhsa or not. The fifth situation is a person who like, you know, has no access to tahara, like whether it's water or tayammum, all the time, right? So it's very limited time, so he has to have that, like, you know, wudu, and then extensively he can do it on, and so he can combine prayers. Another one is a person who is incapable of knowing the timing, right? So for example, a blind person that has nobody to tell him, that person can combine, for example, and estimate. Or a person who is isolated in a room, trapped, that can't figure out all the timings, then they estimate and combine prayers as much as they can. And I think this is the seventh one. Seventh one is like, you know, all the things that allow you, like, you know, so it's called, they say عذر أو مشقة تبيح ترك الجمعة والجماعات, like any sort of concession or a difficulty that allows a person to leave Jumu'ah and Jama'ah, right? So all these are things that allow a person to combine. I think I covered all of them. Allah.
Okay, Shadee. So last question from me for now. Is it correct to say that you'd have haraj as a consideration, hardship? So if there's, because you spoke about, or if it affects a person's job, I don't know if you mentioned if it affects a person's health.
Sorry, can I just jump in there as well? And to what degree does that need to happen? When you say it needs to affect their job, what does that mean exactly?
And I mean the job, I mean like livelihood.
Yeah.
Right. But also things that, for example, they would put in there things that, for example, that a person worries about their belongings, it could be ruined or stolen or, like, you know, damaged. Sometimes they even mention like a person who works in a bakery, if he leaves, like, you know, the prayers and prays on time, that his baking product would get ruined or burnt. So this is like something that would affect his, like, you know, his property, right, or wealth or something. So we're talking about damage over here, difficulties associated with it, like, you know, a person who's hired to take care of, like, to guard something that he cannot leave for, like, pray on time. If he does, then people would rob the place or anything like that. So these are the things that they talk about, for example, right?
Can I just throw a hypothetical? Say someone is let's say is a taxi driver, and he goes for work at 4 a.m., for example. And, you know, could one not make the argument that, look, if he's only getting 3-4 hours sleep, you know, he's putting passengers at risk because he's not, you know, rested well? Would that be enough of a case, or again, it depend on how he feels?
Well, once again, it really depends from person to person, Shaykh, right? Like, you know, some people are 3 hours and they're good, right? Some people an hour and a half, they're good. Some people 5 hours. Some people can't, like, you know, 12 hours is not enough.
So
I
just
can't give you like a blank situation for that one, right? I think it's better off to, like, you know, have that person, like, you know, analyze his situation a bit more in detail. Hold on.
I think, Sadie, what I'm hearing from yourself is very similar to what Sheikh Jamili was presenting from the Shafi'i madhab. We have no room to give a blanket fatwa. When Isha hits this time, it's too late. Jama', we don't have that, but it's kind of a case-by-case situation. You analyze your circumstance, you analyze your situation. Am I hearing that right, Sadie?
Yes, but of course you have to, with the caveat that, like, you know, so I'm just gonna, like, you know, just because when we apply this, you worry about something, right? So for example, like, you know, if you tell people, like, you know, because it's very late, you can pray at home, and then the masjid jama'ah doesn't happen, then there's a bit of a issue over here, because establishing the, like, you know, jama'ah in the masjid is fard kifayah, right? So there has to be at least, like, you know, enough people to, like, you know, conduct a jama'ah in a masjid that is established, and people want to pray jama'ah at home, that is fine. In the Hanafi school of thought, at least, like, you know, that it is mandatory upon the adult male who's capable to pray jama'ah, right? So he can pray with his, like, you know, with his wife, with his adult children at home, that is okay. But we just worry about, for example, the situation, everybody, it's not saying like everybody can leave at home and leave the masjid, right? And so after that, then you take it really case by case, right? Like, you know, there are people, for example, who do have an excuse, whether they're sick, they you know, for them, they're actually unhealthy, they're unable to do this, they're unable to stay very late, and all these things. This is where some of the concessions happen, but it has to be a direct fatwa from somebody. like in a situation like those, you need to seek a fatwa from somebody.
Okay, so he couldn't analyze his situation. He'd have to speak to a scholar, and then
Yes.
he'd need a direct fatwa from him. He couldn't say, well, this Hanbali Shaykh told me if I'm having such little sleep that I could endanger people because I
No,
drink.
stuff like that, I would honestly not feel comfortable unless they actually take a fatwa directly, right? Wallahu
Okay.
Barakallah feek. Maybe if I could circle back a little, because we didn't speak about this, and this is a big issue in the UK about masajid praying before the time even comes in. Is there any room for this? In the, I know Shaykh Nooruddeen, you're speaking about this, and there's no position in the Hanafi school that allows this at all. But do the other schools have anything? Like for example, Isha, like just prayers of red twilight happens at, let's say, 11:30, but they're praying at 10:30. And the reasoning is, well, it's too late. It's too hard for the people, and they're not going to come. So therefore, we're just going to.
Honestly, I like what I understand from Muhammad school of thought, that is not a permissible excuse. Hold on, right? Like it's if you look at it, like how late is it, and practically speaking, like we have to also wonder, like we live in a time. Is is inconvenience counted as difficulty, right?
Mm.
Some people, just because they say it's inconvenient, that they find it difficult. But doing that, bring it that way, unless, for example, there's rain, or there's it's a cold night with wind that's happening, or some of these excuses where you can combine Maghrib and Isha, you can't do that, right? Just a complete blanket of we're going to pray early ahead of time.
If I can chime in for something here, one of the themes of the Sharia that you notice is that this is law, and law needs to be made upon objective measures, visible, seen to everybody. So traveling is objective. Rain is objective. Sickness even is objective, even though you're not even doing real Jama. But hardship is not objective. There's no actual inconvenience, is not an objective thing. So you have students who don't have to get up in the morning. So now are we going to have salah prayer times when I have a job? All right, what happens when you have a job and you're full of energy and you've slept well that night, versus you have a job and you're tired? So you see how the idea, if some people say, oh, the Sharia is just not forgiving because I'm tired. No, the issue is the Sharia is actually making life much easier for everybody by removing hazy measures, unobjective, subjective measures from the equation. This actually makes our life a lot easier. And that's why the Sharia and the four methods do not have a concept of advancing Isha when the time is late and it's hard. Because again, hardship and inconvenience are hazy, subjective, and cannot really truly be measured. And law requires things that are measurable and seen to all of us.
Sheikh Shadee, that's not always the case, at least in the Hanbali school of thought, right? So, for example, the safar, right? The rukhsa for safar, they said الغالب المشقة, even if there's no mashaqqa, right? So now the demarcation is the travel, for example, right? It doesn't matter. So over here, for example, they say that travel, the excuse for combining a travel is the likelihood of hardship. But as you said, sometimes hardship varies, and so they use any sort of travel, whether it's hardship or not. But there are situations where they say, for example, hardship, and there isn't something specified. Sometimes you have to resort to a doctor. I'll give an example. When we talk about combining for sickness, usually this is the sickness that either will result into increase, if you don't combine, increase in the sickness itself, or a delay in recovering, right? And that is really kind of determined more by a doctor. You cannot say it's something it's a specific measure, something they can see. This is, in the end, there is some room, for estimate on Allah. In this case, I don't know, just kind of.
But sickness itself is a state that you're in, right?
Yes, but not any sickness. So, for example, a person who has a common cold, right? That person does not combine, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about once again, a sickness that prevents that if you don't combine, Wallahu A'lam, that would increase your sickness or delay your recovery. And a lot of times this is determined by some sort of a doctor, right?
So same thing with breaking the fast. Sickness is has to be determined.
Yes. Right. Hold on.
Yeah, but at least it's within a bracket of sickness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before we go to, there's a few questions. I don't think they're on topic, but we'll try to take a few of them, inshallah.
Okay, if they're off topic, Sadie, I have one or two things, but you go ahead first.
No, I just wanted to just end this part by asking about, what happens when Isha doesn't come in at all? Do we then estimate? Do we then go by the last time? Do we go by, there's hour and a half, so 1/7 of the night, all these kind of calculations? Is that what your school does as well? Maybe we could start with the Hanafis.
Yeah, Hanafis, no doubt. What I will say first of all, because this is a widespread mistake, if white twilight is persistent, so Isha according to white twilight is not coming in, then what should be done is you go to red twilight. It doesn't make any sense that you say, oh, white twilight Isha is not coming in, therefore we're going to make something up. Therefore we're going to invent something that doesn't exist within the madhab, like pray Isha as an hour after Maghrib, for example. No, white twilight is not coming in, you follow the red twilight opinion. But yes, at times, even in the north of the UK, at times, white twilight persists all night and red twilight persists all night. So then, yes, in that circumstance, we're going to calculate. Now,
before we move on, Shaykh, is there a preferred method, or is that just something?
Imam Ibn Abidin, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned two things. A lot of love for the Shafis today. He did speak about following the position of the Shafis of Aqrab al-Bilad, I believe he mentioned. And he mentioned this from the Shafis. But also, he did mention something from within our own madhab. This will work for Fajr start time and end of Isha, not necessarily start of Isha. He spoke about Nisf al-Layl, half the night. So the first half of the night is Isha Maghrib. The second half of the night is Fajr. Now, I will say this, when it comes to the differentiation between Maghrib and Isha, meaning the end of Maghrib, the beginning of Isha, it does seem it's left a little bit open. So when both red twilight and white twilight are persistent, and we're speaking specifically about when does Maghrib end and Isha start, then there's a little bit more flexibility. But even then, I would prefer doing what Imam Ibn Abidin said, that go with the Shafis, or the issue of, or the opinion of Aqrab al-Bilad. Go to the closest place where it is coming in, and then work it out according to that. But it gets very, very complicated.
There's a question that's kind of related, and I think this is Hanafi, so maybe you could just answer this as well, and then we move on to the other two, inshallah. So someone's asking, so according to Shaykh Atabak, between the days, so 20 May to 20 July in the UK, the time for Isha never comes in. So according to him, Isha and Fajr can be prayed anytime before sunrise.
Yeah,
maybe he's referring to 18 degrees.
Yeah, Shaykh Atabak, firstly, I don't know if he said it like this, but nobody should be saying this date to this day in the UK, because the entire UK is not the same. You see, you go to the very south, it's going to be very different to the very north. You're not going to have the same thing occurring in Southampton and the tip of Scotland. So I don't know if he said it like that. I'd be surprised if he said it like that. But in any case, I do know that he has this approach of when Isha is not coming in, then essentially you can pray Maghrib, Isha and Fajr whenever you like, as long as you maintain the order. The issue is, the biggest issue with that, there are many, but the biggest issue with that is Isha does come in. Isha does come in as long as you move to red twilight, which is an established position in the Hanafi madhab, established from Sahaba, established in the other madhahib. Why would you move away from that to something that is, with due respect, which is the opinion of Shaykh Atabak? Why would you prefer that over the great Imams of Ahl Sunnah?
Sorry, Shaykh, there's just a follow-up as well, and yeah, maybe they can move on. Because by red twilight is a spectrum which can span just over 12 degrees to 17 degrees. So if it doesn't exist on anywhere on a spectrum, then the ruling would be lifted, no?
I don't know what the brother means that it's a spectrum, yani, and 17 degrees. I would suggest, and I'm willing to meet up with this brother and we go out observe together. I would suggest a person who's saying red twilight disappears at 17 degrees doesn't understand what red twilight is. This person is probably looking for what we call al-asfar, which are the dull colors, looking for those dull colors to disappear. Even with those colors, 17 seems very, very late.
Maybe he means it's a spectrum geographically.
North and south,
maybe.
It just doesn't make sense. Whether you're in north or south, what will make a difference is light pollution. And what will make a difference is how clear the horizon is before you. Those things will make a difference.
Hey, Waqas, do you have a picture of a Shafaq al-Ahmar for people to see? Because we keep using this term, and people who don't know what it is, it might be good to
let me bring up some photos, inshallah.
Yeah.
Whilst should we do that?
About video, Shadee.
Yeah, well, I'll bring that video up shortly, inshallah. But maybe we can move on to maybe Shaykh Shadee, you can take over and speak about, what was the question? I forgot what the question. Oh yeah, what do you do when it doesn't come in?
Okay, when a Shafaq al-Ahmar doesn't exist at all?
Yeah.
So this is places essentially where the sun dips and then returns right up. And Sheikh Mahmoud Shabib told me that As-Sawi says we have no nas in the Maliki Madhab on that, and therefore we will see what the Shafi'iyya said about that. And what I understand that they say is they go with Aqrab al-Bilad, the nearest city that has a Maghrib and Isha. And that in their mosques, they pray Maghrib and Isha. That's how we would judge it.
Yeah.
Barakallah fiqh. And Sheikh Ahmed, maybe, is there any difference in yours?
So yeah, so in the case similar, like in case where the Isha, like the Shafaq al-Ahmar doesn't go away, right? Essentially, I'm trying to remember who said it. Which I'll probably try to look at later on. But if I remember correctly, this was kind of mentioned by one of the later scholars when kind of stands bed, and they kind of sent him a fatwa regarding that the Shafaq doesn't go. And if I remember correctly, once I still have to review this again just to make sure. It's similar to what Dr. Shadee had mentioned, is that if I remember correctly, they said they take the nearest country or like bilad, towns or whatever places that have a differentiating, clear differentiation between different time periods. They take that. Now, for some odd reason in my head, I also do remember somebody said you estimate for it, right? And I think they linked it back to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he talks about the Dajjal, the entire day spanning for the cases. And so they asked the Prophet ﷺ about the prior timings, and so he said فَقْدِرُ لَهُ, which means calculate for it. And I think that's a second opinion there, but I cannot remember which one is more of the kind of be considered relied upon. Is it to move to the next country associated with it, or it's to estimate the timing for it, where it usually might happen, and then you pray Isha, right? But regardless, obviously Isha is going to land. You're going to have to pray it either way, but prayers have to be done. And it's going to land at a time where technically in your area, you don't see Isha, right? So whether you estimate by the time or take the nearest country next to you, it still probably be the same result on the Ana.
Yeah, so the summary was, if there's no Shafaq al-Ahmar at all, you go by the nearest city that has Maghrib. If Shafaq al-Ahmar stays there,
no, that has Isha, right? Because Maghrib entered after the sunset. The whole discussion is about Isha, right? That the Shafaq al-Ahmar the red twilight is not gone, it doesn't disappear.
It never goes away. Yeah.
So when do you pray Isha?
Yeah.
Right. And so over here, Isha, you look at the nearest town next to you that has a differentiating Isha that appears, and then you take that time. Or it's you estimate closely when you'd usually Isha would come in, and this is when you pray it. Those are the two opinions, for example, from reasons that I remember in my mind. I still probably have to review that again to make sure which one was clearly stated and which one might be more relied upon.
Just to clarify, that's the opinion within the madhab, or is that taken from the Shafi'is?
So I do remember reading it from one of the fatwa books in the Hanbali school of thought, right? It was kind of mentioned there.
Yeah. I should just mention regarding the Shafi'i madhab, because when I first heard Aqrab al-Bilad, I said, okay, that's fairly straightforward. Find a town, a city nearby where Isha's coming in, take their time. But I'm sure Sheikh Jamili has a video on this as well, or maybe he covered it in our Q&A. It's very complicated because they don't say take their time. They say you look at the portions. So if you take a sunset to sunrise, that's that's the period we're speaking about. You look at what portion of that is Maghrib, what portion of that is Isha, and what portion of that is Fajr, and then you apply that to yourselves. So let's say 20% of that time is Maghrib, 40% or 30%, let's say 40% is Isha, and then 40% is Fajr. You're going to apply it that way. You can't take their time, 9:35. You have to apply the portions. It gets very, very complicated.
Yeah.
And then you're doing hisabat every day. You're doing math every day.
Yeah.
ونحن أمة لا نقرأ ولا نكتب.
Moving as well, because one day, okay, the closest city to you where it's coming in is this city. Next day, they don't have it coming in any longer, so you need to move further down and then further down. It's difficult. That calculation is not very easy to make. This is why I remember years ago, Sheikh Nuh Keller, he wrote an article on this entire issue of Isha and Fajr and such things. And he's a Shafi'i, and he recognized that, they go with Aqrab al-Bilad. But for the start of Fajr, in his article, he spoke about just using the last time method. When you're trying to work out when Fajr starts, just use the last time method. The last time method is really, really simple. Whenever Fajr last came in, for example, in Luton, I don't know if it was 1:12 or something like that, the entire period where there's no Fajr, that's your Fajr time. It's so much easier, it's so much simpler. And his point was, and I have looked into this, and it does seem to be a reasonable point. His point was, it ends up being very similar to Aqrab al-Bilad anyway.
One pushback to the hardship part is that this is a solar matter, and therefore it's fixed year in and year out. This is something that a muwaqqit, a timekeeper, would only have to do once. And then it's the same the next year. You don't have to do this every year, like the month of Ramadan, the moon sighting of Ramadan. And every Muslim community always had a fard kifaya. They had a muaqqat, the person who keeps the times, and mainly for Salah and for the lunar months, Ramadan, and the other months, the Dhul Hijjah isn't needed. But in this case, think about it. You're doing it once, right? And you could come up with different methods. You could say, here's the Aqrab al-Bilad calendar. Here's the last time calculation that Sheikh Nuh mentioned. So it's not really a hardship if the community does that.
Yeah, if it's centralized, it's not so difficult. But I think you may have to do it over 4 years, because obviously a solar year is 365 days and a quarter. So you will have variance from year to year.
Yeah.
But that variance will be repeated every 4 years. So you might have to do it for 4 years. But then, yes, the point is it's not every single year. You don't have to do it every single year. Mm-hmm. And it's centralized. It makes it much, much easier, of course, no doubt.
Yeah, just on the screen we can see this is, again, just indicative and just illustration, but this is what we would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but the disappearance of the red light.
Yeah, what remains there is al-asfar.
And if I just skip forward a little so they have an idea. So this is the disappearance of red light, if you see it like this, and then white would be, are we going to say somewhere, where is it gone?
A little bit more, Sadie, more.
There we go.
Yeah. There you have all remnant light gone there.
So this would be the disappearance of the white twilight.
Yeah.
I think we have a photo of them together. So that's the red twilight and that's the white
beautiful.
twilight. Not the prettiest place to stop, but
wait. When you say red twilight, you mean disappearance of the red?
Disappearance. So this is the disappearance of the red twilight, and this is
okay. So it should say disappearance of red and disappearance
in
of
the
white.
audio. It does.
Okay.
Maybe it shouldn't.
Yeah.
So this on the left is the disappearance of the red twilight, and on the right is the disappearance of the white twilight. We do have some other photos of how it actually goes through the night. But inshallah, I mean, the plan is to do a observation at some point, and we'll put up the video.
There's a lot of observation, but unfortunately we didn't record them. So inshallah we'll do some record them, put them up with some commentary, inshallah.
So that's just to give people an idea. We do have some questions that I do want to go on to. Again, they're not as related. Oh, sorry, there is one that is. 1 second.
Okay. If you did the related one, Sadie, then I think I have a final one regarding Isha, and then we'll go to on to others.
Okay, inshallah. Where did I see it? Oh, this is one that I thought was quite important. Are we individually accountable, or is the responsibility on those setting the timetables? You know, if people are praying before, because a lot of masajid, they just put out, 10:30 when red twilight disappears at, say, 11:30, and so people are praying at 10:30, and a lot of people say, well, it's not our fault. The masjid saying this. Do we follow the masjid or do we not follow the masjid? So if you can all comment on this, inshallah.
Yeah, so this idea, this is one of the strongest criticisms I have of Dr. Asim, although, mashallah, much of the work he done was brilliant, mashallah. But his conclusions were very, very problematic. One of his conclusions was just follow your masjid. What's the point of doing all of that research, going through all of that, if you're going to say just follow your masjid? No, your masjid could be doing all kinds of things which are wrong. Just follow your masjid is not a principle, and especially when your masjid, the decision makers in the masjid are not necessarily the ulama. They are the masjid committee, the people are in charge of the masjid. So certainly from Hanafi perspective, no way. You can't just say follow your masjid blindly and that's fine. That does not work. However, I will say this now. Of course, if somebody is completely unaware, they've never come across the issue to begin with, they've never come across the fact that there is a problem with prayer times, there is a problem with Isha time, they never knew, then how can we say they're accountable then? They had no understanding of what's going on. But as soon as they understand there's a genuine problem here, they do need to look into it, they need to understand it. And I would say right now, it's much, much easier to know that there is an issue. Go back 20 plus years when I first, started looking into this, 23 years ago, roughly, I first started looking into this. Nobody knew about it. Nobody was speaking about it. Nowadays, it's so obvious sometimes that the prayer times app people have on their phone, the one they use, on that app, it will say Isha is coming in at 11:30 and their masjid is praying at 10:45. So immediately that raises alarm bells, that raises questions. What's going on here? Why is this saying this and my masjid is doing something else? So as soon as you realize there's an issue, you do need to start looking into it.
I would also say that if we go by Ibn Rushd al-Jadd's breakdown, that there are mujtahid imams, they don't follow anybody. They're mujtahids. And we agree that mujtahid mutlaq doesn't exist anymore. There's mujtahid of nawazil, maybe, of new matters. And then you have, after that, the opposite polar end of that is the ammi, muqallid, complete muqallid. He doesn't have any madhab. And these are the people that I tell them, don't even bother yourself thinking about madhahib and opinions. You're going to follow your trusted local imams. Then you have fuqaha. And the faqih is somebody who studies the ijtihadat of the mujtahid imams, knows their evidences and knows the rulings, and hopefully knows their evidences and why they're evidences. The dalail and the istidlal, the wajh al-istidlal. Now, the faqih should not follow anything that's outside one of the four madhabs because he knows better, he can research. He shouldn't, just as a mujtahid doesn't follow anybody, the faqih does not follow, even if the whole community was to go and do something that's contrary to the four madhabs and there's not even a qawl, he shouldn't follow it. And our goal as teachers, for example, Dr. Ahmed teaches fiqh a little northwest of where I am here in New Jersey, in North Brunswick. Okay. Our goals is to take people and guide them to the path of being fuqaha, meaning knowing a lot of the rulings of one of the madhabs, and then hopefully become big fuqaha, which means knowing the evidences too of that imam. So that's how I would break it down. The second category cannot follow something outside the four madhabs. And the third category, they're just going to follow their local leaders, and may Allah, inshallah, will accept from them and forgive them for that, because they're not even students of knowledge.
Sheikh, if I just could, before we move on to Sheikh Ahmed, if I could just ask,
Sure.
just on top of that, you're saying obviously they just follow the local scholars, but once you find out that there is an issue, is it not a duty upon you to then inquire, or do you just, well, I don't know anything, and this app is saying 11:30, but my masjid is saying 10:30, so I'm just going to carry on praying at 10:30?
to be honest with you, what is the now the question what is the line between being a regular Muslim and being a student of knowledge? And that's a fuzzy line, right? Because there's a lot of literate people who are smart and they can dabble and they can research, but they're actually not students of knowledge. To me, I define a student of knowledge as somebody who studies the usul of the imams and chooses a methodology and then says, now I'm going to build. So I don't have an answer to you on that literate fuzzy middle between common Muslim who doesn't really bother with thinking about this and the intentional student of knowledge who said, okay, this is my method that I believe is best, okay, most worthy of following, and I'm going to start studying these books with these teachers. That fuzzy line of that literate middle, I don't really have an answer for that.
Yeah. If the discussion, I apologize, I had to go off. If the discussion is, just follow your Shaykh or follow your local Imam or such things, I'm not trying to comment on the Maliki madhab, it may well be different, but I have massive concerns regarding this.
Regarding which part? Oh, just follow your community. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even for awam? Even for common Muslims?
Even for, I'll explain it, inshallah.
Okay.
Or follow your local imam of the masjid, etc. I have huge concerns with this because just in principle, that can cause vast issues. What if your local imam, and this happens, I'm not just, giving a hypothetical, this happens, says all other groups are kafir apart from us. You cannot pray in their masjids. You cannot marry them. You cannot, have anything to do. They are murtadun. This happens. So, in principle, I just strongly disagree with that. What if you have some of the things we've discussed earlier? What if the imam of your masjid, if we keep it specific to Isha, is just going out on a cloudy day saying, well, I can't see any twilight. We're going to pray half an hour after Maghrib. If we're going to set it as a principle that principally you can just follow your imam, that opens up vast doors. And I could give an endless number of examples, and some very extreme ones, and many very problematic ones. When we start saying that to the people, that look, whatever your local imam is saying, you can just follow that, and you, even if it's raises concerns with you, you shouldn't go to another person to check it. We could open up the floodgates to a lot of problems.
Well, here's the thing: the person we're talking about doesn't even listen to these types of podcasts to hear that piece of advice. So what I'm saying is a description, not a prescription. That's his description. The description of the person who he doesn't even have a book in his house. He doesn't have YouTube playlists. He just prays whatever the masjid's doing, he does. So that's a description of that person. And hopefully Allah forgives them and it'll be accepted. Yeah. With the exception, of course, what you said, things that remove you from Islam or from Ahl Sunnah altogether, that may be different. But when their imam is giving something outside the four madhabs, we haven't even reached that person to begin with. So that's like his description. And to be honest with you, it's more prevalent than we imagine. I was at a place with some very educated tech people, like highly educated. And then one of them asked, he said, hold on a second. So, and I'm telling you, this is a white-haired Muslim with a beard. He prays and fasts and everything. He said, hold on. So Uhud came first, then Badr. What? So, of course, I didn't say that to him. I just said, no, brother, Badr came first, then Uhud. But that just goes to show you that there is a type of person in our ummah, and I believe that they're the majority, that will pray and fast and will not ever flick open a book or watch an Islamic video. Yeah. So the description of such a person is that he will just go with whatever Islamic organization in front of him.
Yeah, as I said, Sadie, in my original answer, some dudes never even come across the issue.
Yeah,
they're praying Isha day in, day out, every night. They're praying Isha at their local masjid. Nobody has ever said to them that, oh, there's a problem here. Of course, I'm not going to say that person is accountable. Accountable based on what?
Correct.
There's no way. But my concern is when we, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but this is, a lot of advice that's being given regarding Isha as well. What I have a concern regarding is once a person realizes there's a problem, we say close your eyes and just go with your local masjid or just go with your local imam. I have a massive problem with that. Just like if somebody is praying at a masjid and the imam is saying Fulan is Ahlul Bidah, Fulan is Ahlul Bidah, Fulan is Ahlul Bidah, you can't pray behind them, you can't study with them, you can't do this with them, you can't have anything to do with them. And that's all he's heard. It's never come across anything else. But now he comes across a different scholar or comes across a brother even who says to him, no, that's quite an extreme view. I don't believe we should be saying to such people, don't worry, you are allowed to just stick to your local imam and just go by what he's saying and don't look into this issue further. That kind of approach, when we do something like that, that's likely to divide us much, much further, polarize us much, much further, and likely to make legal rulings just real extreme legal rulings. What if somebody's local imam is saying LGBTQ is fine? It's going to happen. It might be a minority.
Here's the question now. At what point will I preach a message opposite to a local jama'ah? That's the line that we're debating now. I would put the line as a clear-cut matter that removes someone from Ahl Sunnah. Then I will tell the people, do not follow your imams. Break from him. Literally break from the guy. Versus, let's say, quote unquote, غير مقلد community. The community has no madhab. غير مقلد, for people to want to know, they don't follow any imams, any of the 4 imams. And they may have fatawa that are invalid in all 4 madhabs. So in that case, I would have to, the message to preach to that person, so as you don't be ineffective, is to promote following madhab. I'm not going to promote to him a fruit. I'm going to promote the tree. It's irrelevant if I convince him to pray Isha on time, because on the next issue, he's still following the ghair muqallid.
Yeah.
So in this issue, I'm not going to debate with him and argue with him the point.
Yeah, of course.
The farah. I'm going to go to the root. I say, you're our brother, and we're all Ahl Sunnah still, you're ghair muqallid, but still nonetheless within Ahl Sunnah. But I would promote to you, I would say, for your ease, for your accuracy, for be more on solid ground, follow one of these 4 madhahib. And I wouldn't even bother discussing with him about those prayer times.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Shadee. I mean, that strategy, and I can agree with that strategy. That's not a problem. But I just disagree with the principle. And I'm not saying it's your principle. I'm not saying it's what you're promoting. I disagree with the principle that brothers, close your eyes, irrespective of what you've heard, irrespective of what you've come across. Close your eyes, follow your local masjid, follow your local imam sahib. That's what I strongly disagree with. But yeah, in terms of the strategy of what to do, are you going to deal with the fara', or are you going to deal with the manhaj? No problem, inshallah. And I agree with yourself. It makes much more sense to deal with the manhaj.
And we should do a call. Our call and our dawah is for people to become fuqaha. Like, you firstly become a talib ilm. And we don't, well, what does that entail? The way I look at it, it entails you're a talib ilm the moment you prefer to examine the method over the ruling. When I'm sitting with someone and he says, well, I looked at the Hanafi school and I really like the rule on this, but I like the Maliki school because I really need to eat lobster, that this is not a talib ilm. You're not a talib ilm. You're just a talib shahwa, right? Validation of desires. Or you're just a regular guy. But a talib ilm looks at the methods. What is the method by which these imams derive the rulings, which in my view is the most worthy of following? Because as Qadi Iyad says, the ijtihad of the common person, of the student, is to decide which methodology to follow, right? So he has to make ijtihad based on what I know from Quran and Hadith, and looking at these 4 imams. To me, this one is most worthy of following. That's his ijtihad. After he makes that ijtihad, he now studies that method, and he follows a method, and he follows a curriculum, systematically building the tower of his knowledge. And that's the line that I found to be the most commonsensical and sound line between a regular person and a student of knowledge. Then a student of knowledge eventually becomes a faqih. When your fiqh teacher tells you, hey, can you cover for me and teach this? We're on chapter so-and-so. I'm sick. Can you teach for me? That's his first nod. When he says, all right, khalas, now go teach this book, that's his second one. So on and so forth. You become a faqih, a small faqih, then hopefully a big faqih.
Sheikh Ahmed, you've been quiet. Maybe you can give us a bit of your opinion on this matter. You're muted, Sheikh.
Shadee, you're
muted.
on mute. You're muted.
Wait, let me unmute him. Oh no,
There we go.
only you can unmute yourself.
There we go. I just did. No, I was just enjoying the discussion, mashallah. But I also forgot where we started because it's kind of. Oh, never mind. I remember now, right?
It's about following you, just following your masjid. Was the brother
You're
asking
following
you
your
to
masjid
follow
with the cases.
the masjid?
And I think when I first heard that question, right, like the first thing I thought about is like following your masjid in terms like the adhan time they have based on the adhan calculations or the mu'adhin. So my mind just went to the ruling of like the imitating the mu'adhin when they make the adhan, right? If I'm not mistaken, I think like across the board it would be agreed upon that like that whenever the mu'adhin in whatever country goes on, that the people follow him, they don't have to go out and look for the sun, because there's prerequisites for the mu'adhin, right? That'd be a person who's knowledgeable of timing and so forth. And unfortunately, when the time we go with calculations, that had to be just a little bit. Now that coming to the point where if the if the board or the people who are in charge of the masjid themselves make ijtihad on their own, right, without proper qualification, then this is where the problem happens. And I don't think this is essentially the rule. This should be kind of the exception. So we should differentiate between the rule where it's permissible to follow the mu'adhin or the time calculations and stuff like that, as opposed to certain situations where you find, okay, this differs from what's happening in my masjid, right? I think it's something different. I just don't want to make once again a blanket statement, say that no, you have to do ijtihad on your own and stuff like that, because it becomes very difficult. Like, how do you make ijtihad on your own? What do you know? What didn't? As opposed to a particular place or a situation where it becomes obvious there is something that is off, right? This is where you have to take stands and not just this is where you have to inquire a bit more and say, hey, why do you guys differ from all the apps that we have? Like, I downloaded 3, 4, 5 different apps, and you just constantly an hour and a half or an hour earlier than all these other apps. What are you basing this on, right? But I think this should be a time opportunity to kind of address the people who are in charge of those masajid, is to be very careful, right? This is an amana in the end, and they will be liable for essentially what they're doing, right? And at least I would hope that they have had some sort of a fatwa from somebody credible that at least they can depend on, as opposed to making that ijtihad upon themselves, right? Of course, unless they are all mujtahidi of the madhab, then that's something else. But from what you're describing, Shaykh, Shaykh Nooruddeen, that this is a phenomena that's throughout many of the places, that I don't think all these places are mujtahideen of the madhab, right? So I have no idea how that came to be determined. Is it out of convenience? Is it, what is it called? I have no idea.
I've spoken to those sheikhs who give this fatwa that just pray an hour after Maghrib comes in, pray Isha after that. They actually draw on other madhabs. And this was the question I had outstanding. Yes. But just before that, I just want to say, alhamdulillah, this is why I'm always so eager for people to actually not blindly follow and raise issues once they come to them, because alhamdulillah, we do have relatively speaking, we have more masajid now that are praying Isha on time. Mm-hmm. And that's as a result of not just saying, oh, masjid is fine, let's not question them. That's a result of discussions, questions, issues being raised, and then the people who run the masajid are actually looking into it. But one of the senior Deobandis that a lot of the Deobandi masajid certainly used to follow on this issue is Maulana Yaqub Qasimi. And I spoke to him, some 23 odd years ago, and then that discussion continued a little while. He's written a book as well, sent it to me. He explained it like this. He said, look, all of the madhabs apart from the Hanafi, they permit the joining of prayers. Hanafis don't permit it. All of the madhabs permit the joining of prayers.
Sheikh Shadee,
yes.
Do Malikis permit combining, or is it Jam' Suri also?
For Safar?
No, just generally speaking, out of Safar.
Combining for Marad?
Right. No. Well,
or Matar.
So the combining is limited to marad and
Matar.
matar, right?
But the matar is actual combining. It's
Okay.
only yeah. It's
What about
actual
marad?
combining.
Is it suri?
Suri.
Okay.
Suri, for those who don't know,
and then
it's,
travel.
the end of one and beginning of other.
Yes. And then travel.
Travel, it is combining fi jadd al-sayr, when you're moving quickly and it's hard to stop, you combine. And then when you arrive, upon the arrival, there's two opinions. And the Shanaqita, the Mauritanians, they take a line from Khalil that permits combining even when you've arrived at your destination, as long as you're staying there for under 4 days or less.
So it's actually combining, not suri in this case.
That's actual combining. But then there's another opinion, also very strong opinion, probably I think maybe even stronger, that says that once you arrive, you shorten only, not combine.
Okay. All right. No, Nooruddeen, I'm asking that because that whole blanket about the other madhab that allow combining as open-ended like that. I'm like, I don't know if that's true, right?
Yeah, I disagree with him strongly, but his point here wasn't wrong. He wasn't saying they allow it blanket. He said that they all allow joining of prayers in circumstances. Okay, so let me finish his point and then I'll mention what I disagree and then you guys can jump in. Okay, so he said, okay, look, they all allow it. And for example, he said they allow the joining of prayers when you're traveling. Now, he said, and this, I'm mentioning him because he is the one that many of them quoted when I questioned them, where do you get your timetables from? Why are you praying Isha early? He said, look, they allow the shortening of prayer, the joining of prayers because of haraj, because of hardship. There is some kind of hardship, so they allow it. Asking somebody to pray Isha past midnight. Now he's from the north of England, so Isha is later for them than it is for us. For us, it's 11:50 and doesn't go beyond that. So to ask somebody to pray Isha past midnight and then wake up a few hours later and go to work has greater haraj in it than asking somebody to pray when they're traveling. Therefore, we will allow, as Hanafis, we will take the rukhsa and we will pray Isha before it comes in. And I remember at the time, I disagreed with the Shaykh, the Mufti Sahib. I remember taking it to Shaykh Samir and Nas and say, look, Shaykh, what do you think of this? It doesn't sound right to me. Shaykh said, I disagree with it, but if they were going to take a rukhsa, and they're saying that the rukhsa they're taking is one of joining prayers, then it would make much more sense for them to pray Maghrib and then immediately after that pray Isha. How does it make sense to pray Maghrib and then an hour later pray Isha and then say we're taking the rukhsa of Jama'? Makes no sense. So Sadie, I'm going to hand back to yourself. Feel free to comment on anything I've said. But two things I will mention, and I have a question for yourselves as well. One, this is the problem with saying to people, just follow your masjid, because that's what they're following. Okay, that's the basis. That's the rationale behind which they've started to pray Isha and after Maghrib. Now, my question to yourselves is, I think I'm fairly clear on the Shafi answer on this, but what are the conditions of Jama with you guys anyway? Let's start with the Hanbalis anyway. Would that even be valid as a Jama? You pray a prayer, you pray Maghrib, an hour later, you pray Isha.
So in Jama' taqdeem, actually, so when you pray, any sort of prayer in the first one, so whether you pray Asr and Dhuhr, right, in the times that are permitted, or Isha and Maghrib time, Jama' taqdeem, there actually is a prerequisite that one is whatever, well, first of all, the reason that you're doing it persists until you finish, that first one and you go into the second. Also, before you start, you had intended to make that Jama'. But also the third one is that you don't leave a span of time between them, to the point that they actually tell you if you actually pray the Sunnah, that it invalidates that Jama'. Right? And so Jama' really means like you combine, right? So the Sunnah is you finish, you say your salam, and then you make the iqamah for the next one, right? You're allowed to leave like a little bit of time, just a minute or two. But if you enter into a Sunnah, that's considered a break, right? So based on what's happening there, that's not even considered a Jama'. It's not invalid in this case.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah, to pray an hour after Maghrib would be breaking with that first principle that we said, that there cannot be salah in the wujud al-shafaq, and that would not be jam' at all. Like, how are you making jam'? You just split it by an hour. It doesn't, it's not a thing for us.
Yeah.
From what I've seen from the fuqaha that I've talked to about this issue, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
It's not one of the options they give for this.
There's a brother, unfortunately Sheikh Jamili isn't here, but there's a brother who's claiming that this 1 hour or given period after Maghrib to pray Isha does have some basis in the Shafi'i school.
No problem. Show us the basis so we can analyze it. No problem, inshallah. I don't mind anybody presenting any madhab and saying it's there, but you have to show us something. It's no good just throwing things out there. Just like the Mufti Saab, he mentioned this, and then look, when we actually ask people who follow that madhab, well, just simply doesn't work like that. So, you know, all of these things, this is one of my biggest issues with this entire discussion. People will throw things out there, and then on the smallest amount of scrutiny, it just doesn't hold up to it. You know, like here, I've had, because, you know, people, I inform people, look, they're praying Isha early, and then they would just throw out, then, well, Isha's not coming in anyway. Well, Isha is coming in right now. Red twilight is coming in, but they pray Isha early when white and red is coming in. So it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, just on that, someone actually did say that. They said, could it not be the case? I can't remember where, but basically they were saying that Isha is not coming in, and so they're just dividing the nights into parts for Isha.
Yeah, two issues with that. One, Isha is coming in, but secondly, fine. In Scotland right now, Isha is not coming in. Neither red twilight nor white twilight. No problem, inshallah ta'ala. That's a completely separate discussion. But let's stick to parts of Scotland. Isha is not coming in right now. I'm not interested in that discussion right now. When Isha was coming in, what were your masajid doing? Was your masjid praying it? Because when Isha was coming in, then white twilight was, say, coming in at 12:45, red twilight was coming in at 11:45. Was your masjid following that? And if they weren't following that, then this discussion right now is irrelevant. Let's start with the most obvious discussion, which is when it's coming in, they're praying it early. Let's start with that, and then we'll deal with what to do in this situation.
We also have another point. If we're trying to persuade somebody who's doing that, chances are they're غير مقلد. They take their fiqh outside the four madhabs. They don't care about our saying this madhab says this. They say, oh, I got it on my own brain. So what we have to say,
unfortunately, this is not the case there.
But the Ahmadis, they're all doing it.
Who? Oh, Ashab madhab?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, then we'll say what's their. Then surely they have some kind of hujjah. What is it? The fatwa of their locals, their elders. Correct?
One of the fatwa they're following is the one that I just mentioned to you.
Okay, so either way. So the answer would be, now, when we put these on the table, we say, your sheikh gave a fatwa. Is it possible for him to be correct in his fatwa? Can he be a mujtahid? Well, it's not out of the shar'i possibility. Shar'an, yes, there could be a mujtahid today, and he could be musib, right? And he's a mujtahid. So the question is now, on this ibadah, are you more comfortable? It's a matter of comfort now and security. Do you have more comfort and security with him as your mufti and your mujtahid imam on this mas'ala, or with that which has been said in the past? Because shar'an, that which has been, by sharia, that which has been said by the four imams, and that was said by someone today, the sharia doesn't comment specifically on these people. It comments on what is most likely to be sound, which is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. Don't take a position unless you have certainty. Ilm here means certainty. So what is more certainty? What do you feel more secure about? To rest my ibadah on a few people who have agreed upon that this is the truth and this is good and this is correct for the last 20 years, or not? Yes, that really ends up being the case. Yes or no? And I'm going to say, me personally, I'm going to rest myself on what is more I like more certainty than that. Some historical reference to this. Because there have been Muslims in the Caucasus. We're not the first Muslims to live very north or very south. Let's think about that for a second, right? Sometimes we think, oh, it's modern times. Everything is new. No, a lot of things are not new, right? There's been liwat. There's been people living in the north. There's been people living in cloudy areas. There's been people living where there's no hot water, etc. So if the guy tells me, no, my sheikh is a scholar and a faqih and righteous, and this is his fatwa, and I believe he's musib, even if no person in history has ever said it before. So I will tell him, I believe that's incorrect to follow because it's so open to error, but what else can I tell you? That's it. It's up to you and your belief in your source and your confidence in that mufti.
There's a question here. I'm not sure if either of you heard this term before, but someone's asking, is red twilight called civil twilight as well? Anyone come across this term before?
I would have to check. The civil twilight, I'm not sure if it's the one at 6 degrees or the one they have at 12 degrees. I'm not sure, but I don't know. I don't feel too comfortable mixing the terminology. You see, let's stick to what we're speaking about. Red twilight, what is it exactly? The bright colors in the sky. Because if I say, if it is called civil twilight, and then you compare the definition that we have in Sharia to what they're speaking about in astronomy, it might not match. So stick to the phenomena we're speaking about.
Yeah.
The brother has commented again. He said 1 hour after Maghrib is not Jama, but there is some basis in the Shafi school, but only when you can't establish Isha. I took this from the Shafi ulama in Jordan, and that was not to accuse Muslim doing something wrong.
Okay, so here's the thing, wild thing. For persuasion purposes, in order for us to be persuaded, let's say, we need a quote from somebody, even if it's a contemporary scholar, because otherwise what you said is not something we could actually accept. It's just a saying. It's almost hearsay. We need a quote from somebody, right? Shaykh so-and-so said this in book such and such. I'm sure that you're just listening and it's off the cuff, but to be persuasive fiqh-wise, we need the specific saying of the Shaykh. And how do I know your transmission is sound? You're just called wild thing, right? You don't exist to us, legally speaking, right? You are mubham. So I'm not making fun of him, I'm just saying in general that as a principle to convince us in fiqh is you got to bring us something. But at least he brought something where we can go and ask some of the fuqaha of Jordan, such as the wise scholar Shaykh Salah Abul Hajj. We can ask them what they said now that he tipped us off to it. And I know people, you hear things all the time, but you don't always keep record. I'm sure like that's the case with him. But in terms of weight, we just need a quote.
Wild thing is persisting that red twilight disappears between 12 to 17 degrees. So he's convinced that at 17 degrees it does disappear. And this apparently is backed up by most astronomical authorities.
Yeah, no problem. Later on, Wild Thing can get in touch with us. And if he's in the UK, we'll go outside together, inshallah.
There we go. There's an invitation there, Wild Thing.
In Jordan, they're giving a fatwa for outside Jordan because they don't suffer this problem, right?
I assume so. That's what he's claiming. He's saying he asked the Shafi ulama in Jordan. I took this from Shafi ulama in Jordan.
Okay, so now that he's tipped us off to Jordan, we'll ask the shuyukh in Jordan what they said and what their basis is. It's easy.
I think that's everything on topic. Shaykh Nooruddeen, I think you said you had a question, and then we can wrap it up, inshallah.
That was the one, Sadie. It was about Jama. Yeah, it's done. Let's just go for about 5 more minutes. I think we should.
Do you want to take some of the off-topic questions now, or?
I'm okay too, inshallah.
I got 5 minutes, inshallah.
Okay, yeah, inshallah. We'll try to wrap it up in 5. We'll start from the start. Brother Adam's asking, question for Sheikh Shadee. Sheikh Nooruddeen brought this up last live stream when you couldn't make it. Do Malikis consider it sinful to miss Sunnah Mu'akkada regularly without excuse?
I'm not going to answer the Maliki questions.
No, it's for Sheikh Shadee.
They say that he has a flaw in his religion. They say it's a defect. And the Sunnah Mu'akkada being, for example, the 2 Sunnah before Fajr, which is Raghiba, not even Sunnah Mu'akkada, but to make things simple, that's one of them. You should never regularly skip it. And stronger than that is Witr. It should never be regularly skipped.
Okay, this one's a bit more on topic. We'll try to keep some way topical questions. This one, we'll start with the Sheikh Ahmed. He's asking if it's best to pray the Tahajjud after you sleep or best to pray straight after Isha. any set amount of rakat to pray tahajjud? So 2 questions. Is it better to pray after you sleep? Oh, sorry. Is it best to pray after you sleep or before? And then is there any set amount of rakat?
All right, to give that a rapid fire answer, if you what you pray after you sleep, but before you sleep is not tahajjud. Tahajjud requires that you were to sleep and then wake up before Fajr to pray. Anything beyond that is qiyamul layl. It's just extra nafl. But tahajjud, notice the Quran says they get up from the warm beds and it's in the last third of the night. And even if the night kept you up for some business, then it's what's in the last third, preferably last sixth of the night. That's with the tahajjud time.
Okay. And any set amount?
No, 2 minimum. And 12 will earn you a palace in Jannah.
What about the other madhahib? Is it the same? There's no set amount?
Tahajjud, no. Tahajjud, there isn't necessarily a set amount. Wallah.
Yeah, Hanafi 2 will suffice, and it's similar to the Maliki. If you pray before sleeping, it's qiyamul layl, and if you pray after sleeping and then waking up, it's tahajjud, irrespective of whether you do it in the last third of the night or the last sixth.
Okay. This one's a bit more on topic. So, brothers asking, can we apply the 13 degrees fatwa of Isha for Germany as well?
13 degrees. Look, Shaykh Nuh Keller, when he cited in Jordan. We cited in the UK, other people cited in the US. The degrees doesn't differ. What's going on differs. Okay, how far below the horizon the sun goes differs. In terms of the natural phenomena, that doesn't differ from place to place.
So basically, everywhere around the world they can use this.
Yeah, this is why they'll call the astronomers will say astronomical twilight is 18 degrees. That's like a blanket thing they say. They don't say it differs from place to place. What you can personally observe is a little bit different. If it's cloudy, you're going to observe something different to if it's not. But in terms of where the sun has to be and the sun's positioning and the resultant natural phenomena, that's the same everywhere.
Brothers followed up by saying France uses 12 degrees.
12 degrees is reasonable. I personally prefer 13. It's not unreasonable, but
it's just to be more cautious, right, Sheikh?
Yeah, 13 is much more cautious. 12 is reasonable. Shaykh Jamili, who's done a good number of observations, he's convinced that it has to be 13. But in my observations, 12 is reasonable. 12 and a half is very good. 13, inshallah, there's no doubt Isha's in by 13.
Okay, there's a question, where can we find the exact timetables where Isha begins in the UK? For that, inshallah, I'll just post the link in the chat. We do have, Islam Answers has its own prayer times table with the different degrees. Not all the towns and cities are on there, so if your town and city isn't on there, you can request it and inshallah we'll add it. But I'm sure there's other websites that provide the different degrees, inshallah, that you can put in. I think one that comes top of my head is called Muwakkid, so you can look that up, inshallah, and that's global. Carrying on, the next question that was somewhat relevant. Let me see if I can find it.
Waqas has 60 seconds.
Okay, now on okay, this one's not so relevant, but we'll just ask it since you put me on the spot. What has caused a Muslim downfall in their contribution in academic fields? This might not be able to answer in 30 seconds, but Sheikh, we'll give you 30 seconds.
That's like a PhD thesis right there.
You put me on the spot, so I thought I'd put you back.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think that's everything. I can't really see anything else that's quick. So inshallah, we can wrap it up there. Barakallah feekum, jazakallah khair. Anyone has any final words, please say, otherwise we'll wrap up inshallah.
That's it. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khairan.
Barakallah feekum. Salam alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Salam wa rahmatullah.